Hello, and well, welcome to another War Thunder video, and this is the A6M2N, otherwise known as the Float Zero, or probably as it's better known, the worst Zero in the War Thunder. So, why am I flying the worst Zero in War Thunder? Well, there's actually a reason why I'm flying this thing. And it's because of a discovery that I actually made not too long ago, and actually I'm going to go ahead and lower the sound here. Really should have done this off camera, but hell, I'm crap. So yeah, you can actually, well, as we were about to see, you not only can damage that centerline float, but also you can rip it off. Now, this Float Zero that you are watching is not spaded. This match did, however, spade the Float Zero. And I'm going to go ahead and just read to you, while I fail miserably at trying to rip those pontoons off. Just going to read you a few stats of about the aircraft when it is spaded. So, at 5,000 meters, it has a top speed of 272 miles an hour without WEP. With WEP enabled, it has a top speed of 278 miles an hour. At 3,000 meters, it has a top speed of 265 miles an hour under 100% throttle, and 275 under WEP. On the deck, so basically below 1,000 meters, it has a top speed of 232 miles per hour without WEP, and a top speed of 250 miles an hour with WEP enabled. Maximum dive speed is 487 miles an hour. Now, that is with the floats on. Now, what I'm going to go ahead and explain to you here is I actually figured out how to rip these floats off, and I'm going to go ahead and explain the advantages of not having those floats in a second. So, the centerline float can only be ripped off on land, and the side floats, or the pontoons, can only be ripped off in the water. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start with the centerline float. So the centerline float, it can be ripped off between a speed of 240 and 245 miles an hour, so it's very delicate in terms of you have to be very, very careful when trying to rip that off. And then safe speeds for ripping off the side floats, anything between 135 and 260 miles per hour, and the side floats will rip off. However, you can only rip them off in the water. The centerline float can only be ripped off on land. And I came in a little bit too hard there. Now, while I get this thing repaired, I'm going to go ahead and speed it up. You have to be coming in very, as you saw, you have to be coming in very, very gently in order to rip the centerline float off. So, what happens to the overall performance of the aircraft when you rip these floats off? And I'm only going to rip off the centerline float in this one because it wasn't here that I really noticed that you couldn't rip off the center floats, or the pontoons on water. I discovered that in test flights, or in a custom battle actually, after this match was over. So, obviously advantages of ripping the floats off. For one, speed, maneuverability, climb rate, all of those are increased. Another thing is that it actually removes a fuel tank. So if you see the damage model down in the bottom corner of the screen, you're going to notice that I've taken damage to a fuel tank by the looks of it. And that's actually the centerline float. The centerline float actually houses a main fuel tank. And this is actually probably one of the easiest ways to shoot down the float plane Zero, is by shooting the centerline float. If that float it won't really be blown off by cannon or machine gun fire. You can shoot off the pontoons on each side, but the centerline float can only be ripped off by scraping it across the ground. Now, getting rid of that float, it obviously has the most drag associated with it, so it's going to get rid of the most drag that you could possibly have on the aircraft. And another thing is that it gets rid of the main fuel tank in that pontoon or in that float. So basically, if you rip that float off, you become a Zero. You basically become a standard Zero. The only difference is that this Zero doesn't have the this Zero has obviously that little thing sticking off the bottom of the aircraft, and also the side pontoons. So, now that I've got done with that, and while I'm in this little dogfight here with a couple of enemy aircraft, I'm going to go ahead and read to you the stats of the aircraft in terms of its overall... I'm going to read to you its top speeds with the floats off. And I achieved these in custom battles under the arcade flight model. By the way, all of this was done in arcade flight model in custom battles, not in test flights. Custom battles is basically what I just used to experiment with everything, because it's more accurate than test flights are. So anyway, 5,000 meters, maximum top speed under 100% throttle was 325 miles an hour. Under WEP I got that up to 330. At 3,000 meters, the maximum speed was 310 miles an hour, and under WEP it was 323. And down below 1,000 meters, the top speed was 270 miles an hour and 282 under WEP. Maximum dive speed went up to 497 miles per hour as opposed to 478. And that was with both sets of flaps torn off, the pontoons on the side and the centerline float. Not only that, but this thing basically became a Zero in terms of maneuverability, speed, and climb rate. In fact, I tested the stats on this aircraft, spaded versus a spaded Model 11. This is the first Zero that you get in the game. Or, no, not the Model 11, it was the A6M2, which is the second of the proper Zeros that you get in War Thunder. That's the one with the naval, with the carrier hook. So, yeah. And the A6M2N, in terms of speed, was outperformed by this aircraft by only 2 miles an hour. So, in terms of level flight speed, I didn't test it in a dive because I didn't think that the A6M2 would have anything in comparison to this. I thought it was going to be a hell of a lot higher. But yeah. What I need to do is I need to test this thing up against a standard Zero in terms of maneuverability and climb rate with the floats off, because I already know that it's pretty terrible with the floats on, but I need to test it with the floats off. So, yeah, if anyone is willing to volunteer for that, please tell me in the comments, and I will be more than happy to take you up into a custom battle and test this thing out. So yeah, what do I think about this aircraft? Well, it's a piece of shit. However, it's a piece of shit that can be turned into a very, very good aircraft. And it's really down to the floats. Now, after this match is over, I'm going to take this thing up into a test flight, and I'm going to show you what I mean by ripping the floats off. I'm going to demonstrate to you guys how to rip these floats off. So, yeah, that's... I'll do that. However, problems with ripping the floats off. Well, obviously, one, if you get a... well, first problem is you need quite a bit of open space in order, like a runway, in order to actually rip the floats off, because you need time to be able to accelerate, and then you need a lot of open area just to be safe. You don't technically need a lot of open area, but just to be safe, you need basically a whole runway in order to scrape the centerline float off. Now, that's not really a problem on arcade and realistic maps in terms of ground strike. However, in terms of a domination match, that would be really difficult. Now, there's another problem, and that's those two side floats. The problem with the side floats, like I said, is they can only be ripped off in water, or they can be shot off. They can be shot off, or they can be ripped off in water. But it's a hell of a lot easier to just rip them off than it is to have them shot off by a squad mate. In fact, if you try to have them shot off, you're most likely going to get yourself shot down. Wood P-47, I'm not stupid enough to go head on with that. So yeah, the float plane Zero, in terms of ripping the floats off of the thing, it is possible, and it is very, very much worth your time doing that. However, it is very risky. For example, on this map, Gorge, the only place that I could actually rip the floats off of this aircraft was in the canyon, in between basically right down the center of the map. And that is a very, very dangerous place to be on this map, because it really, you're right down at sea level, and it's just so easy for an enemy aircraft to dive in on you while you're trying to rip those two side floats off and just kill you or boom and zoom you to death at will. It really is. It really is dangerous trying to rip these pontoons off on this map, which is why I only ripped off the centerline float. And, well, actually, the centerline float, I only ripped that off to get rid of that drag in that fuel tank. Like I said, I didn't actually know that you could only rip off those side floats on water. I just decided, you know what, I'm gonna just try to get some kills, and hopefully I can spade this thing in one match. I'm not gonna keep wasting my time. And yeah, it was very, very much worth it. Obviously, I would have done better had I knocked those other two floats off. But as it was, I seem to be... I've done perfectly fine as it is, so yeah, I'm happy with this. And what's else is that, well, as you can see, I haven't been shot down yet. I'm in probably the worst aircraft. This is by far the worst Zero in War Thunder, and I haven't been shot down yet. Now, and it's not even spaded too. Just just to add insult to injury, this match, I only had the Tier 1 and 2 upgrades researched. I was working on the cover. I didn't have the engine. I didn't have the wing repair. Or no, not the cover. It was the wing repair I was working on. So yeah, I didn't have the engine. I didn't have the engine injection. I didn't have the cover. I didn't have the gun. The 20mm cannon upgrade. I didn't have the wing repair. I just had the Tier 1 and 2 upgrades researched. And honestly, it's even better when it literally is a 0 with the floats ripped off when you spade this thing. It's absolutely phenomenal. So I'm going to go ahead and just end this replay here. There really wasn't anything else to this match. I did shoot down a bowfighter in the last dying minutes of, in the last, dying seconds of the match, but it was an idiot bowfighter pilot. He tried to turn fight with a 0. Listen, just because this is a float plane 0 doesn't mean it's not maneuverable, okay? Especially if the pilot is smart enough to rip the floats off, okay? Let's go ahead and get that out of the way now. So, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording, and I will come back I'll come back with a test flight, or a custom battle or whatnot. Alright, so here we are with the test flight. So, this, I'm going to end the video after I get done with this, but this is basically going to just demonstrate how to actually rip the floats off. So I'm going to go ahead and get into the air. Now, like I said, the side floats can only be ripped off in water, and they rip off at 135 miles an hour. That is when they break. Safe speeds is anything from 135 to 260. I really wouldn't advise going anything over 260, just for the fear of flipping your plane over. There we go, broke the bottom float. I haven't broken it off yet, but I have broken it. So there we go, there goes one of them. Let's see, come on, break the other one off. There we go, there it goes. Ideally, you would want to break both of them off at the same time, just to get yourself, just to make sure that you're not, in danger at all. And really the only good thing about this float, by the way, is for realistic, you get a lot more fuel. Because of the fact that that centerline float is a fuel tank, you do get a lot of fuel out of this thing in realistic, but well, ideally you won't really need it. There we go. Now, remember this, when you're going to rip the floats off of this aircraft, come in very shallow and very low. And the reason for that is because if you come in too fast, or if you come in at too hard of an angle, you're going to flip the plane over. And you're not, you may rip the float off, but you're going to flip the plane over. Now, if you flip it over on a runway, obviously you can get a repair and a rearm. However, if you don't, and this is one of the reasons why I advise doing this on a runway, if you don't do this on a runway, then you're basically dead. You're going to be in a 0, flipped over, and dead. There's nothing you can do about it. So this is why I advise, if you're going to rip the floats off of this aircraft, rip them off on a runway so that you can repair the plane if you fuck up your approach. Also, as you can see from the speedometer and all that up on the top of the screen, this thing does only have the 2 cannon with 60 rounds of gun and the machine guns, so yeah. Also, landing this aircraft, You can get a repair and a rearm if you break the floats off of this aircraft in realistic and in arcade. However, it won't work in a test flight. But if you do rip the middle, if you do rip only the middle float off, you can still land in the water. However, I think it becomes a tail dragger in the water because the centerline float just, it actually stabilizes the plane while it's in the water. However, if you rip off the side floats and try to land in the water, the plane will capsize. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem. However, if you rip all three of them off, and I can only deploy combat flaps, by the way. You can deploy landing flaps if you have that button set, but I only have combat. So yeah, landing this aircraft, you basically belly land it. And I haven't tried this on a carrier, but I am very much tempted to. And there you go. You use that thing right there that the centerline float actually hung off of. And yeah, you are going to flip the plane over, but I would imagine if you do that on a carrier, you are going to get a rearm and a repair. Although, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and try that. Alright, and here we are, and this is actually a realistic flight. This is actually under the realistic flight model, so here's what it flies like under realistic, and it does get an air spawn, for those of you who are curious. Also, it does have the option of carrying two 60-kilogram bombs, however, I'm going to just ditch them. So, I'm going to take a little bit more caution in ripping the floats off here, and in fact, you know what? I'm going to see if I can rip them off in a dive. No, okay, don't want to break the plane. Although I guess breaking the floats off does technically qualify as breaking the plane, but no. You know what I mean. Stop being a smartass. Alright, so 135 miles an hour. Yep, we're above that. There goes one of them. There goes the other one. Perfect. Throttle up. Alright. Now what I will do actually is, because this is actually a spaded float plane zero, as you can see, this thing is spaded. So, and also keep in mind, the stat card, if you do rip the flaps off of this, if you do rip the floats off of this thing, the stat card only corresponds to the floats when they are on. So when you rip the floats off, no longer pay attention to the stat card. Pay attention more to something like this. So if you do actually decide to rip the floats off, remember, you're no longer flying a float plane zero, you're flying a standard zero. Alright, so what was it, 245, something like that. Coming in a little bit slower, but yep, see, came in at too high of an angle. And okay, so apparently it will. Hi carrier, don't hit my plane. Okay, it went through. I don't know, I'm scraping against the side of it. Okay. Let's try that again. Oh yeah, full fuel tank, by the way, an hour and 55 minutes if you keep the float on. So is that carrier? No, it's not going to stay there. Damn it. Okay, let's see if I can rip these off. I would imagine you can, but I'm just not giving it enough altitude. Okay, 10 Gs. I don't want to pull more than that. Okay, you know what I'm actually going to try to do? I'm going to try to rip this centerline float off first, just to go ahead and get that out of the way. come in at a really slow, really flat angle. Perfect, perfect. Oh, good. I knocked one of the other ones off, too. Sweet. And... okay, that's weird. Oh, shit. Oh, okay, now it's gone. I was wondering what had happened to that float tank. That fuel tank. Alright, perfect. Alright, so there goes that float. So now we're just flying on the engine. We don't have any... we don't have the reserve fuel tank. We do not have the pontoons. We can no longer land in the water with this thing. And also, of course, we don't have any landing gear. Because the floats actually are the landing gear for this aircraft. No, technically. And okay, so apparently the centerline... so apparently that little thing there actually counts as the fuel tank, apparently, or something. Either that or it's thinking that the float is still there, even though it's very clearly not. Okay, I kind of wish these things weren't moving. That would definitely make this a hell of a lot easier. Really should not have picked this map, should I? Should have picked Midway. Midway or something like that. Alright. Well, anyway, I'll just set these flaps to combat. And I am actually going to ballistic brake here just for good measure, because I don't want to roll off or slide off of the carrier deck. You may not have ammunition while you're doing this. And okay, so I've flipped the aircraft over and I am getting a repair 14 seconds. So if you do it like that, there you go, you get a minimum repair time, and you... Now, here's the biggest problem with repairing and rearming, though. Once you do it, you gotta rip the floats off again. So, that is the biggest problem with doing this, is once you do it, you gotta rip the floats off again. Oh shit, the bombs actually skipped. I didn't notice that. Cool. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and rip these floats off again. Okay, well that didn't work, no did it. Anyway, you guys probably get the idea. So, anyway, I think what I might do is actually take this thing up into an actual realistic match and rip the floats off just to see how it performs. Either that, or I'll just go and do it in a test flight or a custom battle. So yeah, there you go. There's the A6M2N, and why it's infinitely a better aircraft when you rip the floats off. So anyway, and also keep in mind, for any of you who are going to fly this aircraft and who are going to spade it, if you do decide to follow my advice, the stat card only corresponds to the aircraft when it has the floats on. It doesn't take into account if you rip them off. So once you rip them off, you're basically flying this or this, one of the two. You're no longer flying this. So keep that in mind. And yeah. In terms of max fuel load, let's see, hour 33. So yeah, you basically, it seems like there's only 20 minutes in that fuel tank. Or 23 minutes in that fuel tank. So, yep. Or 22 minutes, pardon me. So yeah, that's all I have to say. And I will see you guys next time.